the goalies they get a pass. Like,
His thing is just reaction time. Like his reaction time just needs to get quicker.
yeah, well, some of that's just figuring out how to see the ball better.
Yeah.
Like, and that's again, that's where you get the process stuff. Is go through addendum of clauses B. We did this on the meeting on Tuesday. Um, and I find that home for sale contingencies, home to settle contingencies, uh, seller's home of choice contingencies, are really important things that I think we really need to make sure we're up to speed on. Because I think it's, like I said on Tuesday, it's a tool that you guys are going to be able to use um, in your favor. And part of the problem is that, um, sorry, um, it's really technical and there's a lot of pitfalls to it if you're not careful. Got it? All right, let's dive in here. Let me share my screen. All right, can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right, so here's addendum of clauses B. So the way GCAAR operates, they've got two sections, right? We went over addendum of clauses A last week. This week we're going over B. B is some of your less used, so that's the way they've separated it. They kind of looked at the two potential clauses. What gets used the most? Closing cost credits, home inspections, rate on inspections, what gets used the least. And then they separated it so that you don't have to carry around an addendum of clauses, one form of it that has just way too much stuff that confuses your buyer. Make sense?
Yes.
Maybe. Okay, good. This is the interactive part of the class. Um, so ask any questions as we go through this. Sorry, I'm pulling up my notes now. Okay. Let's dive into sale of buyer's property contingency with kickout. So this is being used in situations where you may meet a client, they've got their townhome that they're living in, they want to go out shopping, looking for properties. Uh, they have to sell the townhome to be able to afford the next home. Current in the past 4.5, 5 years, that's been impossible. No seller would take, very few sellers would take a property contingency like this. Right now, you've got options. You definitely have this option at your disposal. I'm seeing this more and more with contracts coming through. So it's something that you can kind of pitch your clients on as far as an option. I always tell my clients you've got when it comes down to this for your buyer clients, there's like three options. We can go use this. This is more of your traditional sale of buyer's property. Um, you will never be homeless, right? Like so, or you should never be homeless. You you don't sell you don't buy the home until you sell your current home. So for qualification purposes, there's some certainty for the buyer. There's a lot of uncertainty for the seller. So,
I don't understand why, as a listing agent, I would ever accept or tell my clients to accept this.
yep. And we'll kind of go through what filters you want to use. So this is more of your traditional way we used to do it. The second option is, well, buyer, you can sell your home and go homeless, right? We basically sell your home, but do you have a mom, dad, brother, sister you can move in with while we keep shopping? That way, though, you are homeless, but you have your cash in hand and your highest and best qualification, and you can negotiate a lot better. Another option is and we'll be going through this, is you put your home on the market, get it under contract, get it a little further along with contingencies, then you try to go out shopping with option two, which is a home to settle contingency. You have all of your contingencies removed except for financing, and you're just waiting for settlement. Then there is another flavor, which is, and you add on to this is the home of choice. And that's one where you get your home on the market, you get it under contract. Um, but with that contract, you add on a contingency for your seller, for your buyer to purchase another home. So I'll walk through all of these. So you kind of get three flavors of this. Um, so this is the more traditional one. So it's contingent on from the date of ratification. We talked about this. What's the right time frame for this? So keep in mind to this contingency that you're setting up for your buyer, you need it long enough that A, you can get the house on the market, B, you can get the house under contract, and C, you can remove all these contingencies. So 10 days, maybe you can get it under contract in 10 days, but you're not going to be able to clear all the contingencies in 10 days. So we tend to see something, 15, 30, 45 days for this. Um, and that depends on how long you think it will take to sell the buyer's property. As a buyer's agent, you want to make sure when you are presenting a contract with a home to settle, a home to sale like this, number one, you've got your comps ready. You can present, because in a sense, what you need to do is convince the listing agent that there is very little risk in taking their home off the market for you to market this property and get it under contract. Um, so property located at, you tell the seller what property we're looking at selling. Good listing agent should look this up, figure out what the value of the property is, even if the buyer's agent doesn't submit any of that information. It says if the buyer doesn't satisfy or remove this contingency by the deadline, to the pursuant to paragraph 1C, and we'll get into that, then at any time after the deadline, but prior to buyer satisfying or removing the contingency, either buyer or seller may declare the contract null and void. So let's say you had 21 days in here and you get to day 21, the seller realizes that your buyer has been working diligently to get their home, or maybe you're under contract and maybe they're working on just finishing up inspections. So that doesn't necessarily die. The contingency continues until one of the party decides to pull the plug on it. If you're a buyer, that can be risky, right? So you always want to, maybe get an extension to this if you know you're coming up on that deadline, but have a good reason why you need an extension. Yep.
Can you, as the listing agent, make any other provisions on like what you are willing to let them accept from their contract? Meaning, you have to do less than 10-day home inspection or 7-day home inspection. You have to do less than 5-day appraisal. Like, are you allowed to make any of those demands? I say
Yeah.
demands, but
yeah, I mean, in theory, absolutely. Um, I always come from a school of thought that I don't want to over negotiate something that I'm not sure how or what I'm negotiating, right? Because part of that is I need to make, like, the best bet is to make sure that these sellers get, or I'm sorry, these buyers who are buying my listing, who are contingent on their home sale, get the best offer possible. Price and terms, right? And there's sometimes a balance of those price and terms. And I need this thing to go through,
yeah.
right? So yeah, you can put parameters on it. It just gets a little difficult as to how now they're tasked with trying to negotiate this thing a certain way. Um, and it may not be feasible. Um, and again, I think that's where you really got to be specific about as far as listing agent looking at the number of days. If they are asking for like 45 days, I'm gonna balk at that. I'm like, that's just way too long. As a
Yeah.
buyer's agent, if I can negotiate it that long, I'm gonna try to negotiate it that long. Yep, go ahead. Okay. Um, all right, so let me see. All right. So seller may continue to offer the property for sale and accept bona fide offers to this contract. During the term of the contingency, a backup offer is accepted. Seller will deliver notice to buyer requiring this contingency to be satisfied or removed pursuant to paragraph 1C no later than X days after delivery of notice, or this contract will become void. So this is the period where seller gets a backup offer and says, "Hey, I know you guys have been working on getting your home sold. It's not happening. You have X number of days." What's a reasonable amount of days? Usually about three is probably a reasonable amount. As a listing agent, I don't want to accept anything longer than three because you're either going to know or not know. And if we need to give you more time, I can give you more. We can negotiate more time. I just don't want to be stuck on a listing agent situation where now I've given you a whole week and my backup offer is like, let's go. What's going on? When are we going to know? Um, and there are times when I knew I was getting a backup offer and I basically had a soft notice to the buyer who had a home for sale contingency and just said, "Hey, look, here's what's happening. We have a buyer who's telling me they're really interested. I know you said they didn't want to tap into their 401k to make this sale happen, but you know, if we accept this backup and I give you notice, you're going to have 3 days. So, I just want to give you a heads up. If that's a situation, I really want to continue to keep this buyer in the deal. If I wanted to kick him out, if I felt like I'm getting a backup, it's a better backup. I'm not telling the buyer's agent anything about what's going on as far as strategy. Does that
And
make sense?
Joe, when this is, what status would this home be in the MLS?
Yeah, so you're going to be in active under contract or pending status. Um, again, we talked about this on Tuesday's call. We used to have contract. We used to have contract. We had contract kick out and contract no kick out. Everyone knew a contract kick out was a home for sale contingency. We no longer have that, and a lot of properties wind up going in AC status, that active under contract status, whether they've got a kick out or don't have a kick out.
And so you would put in the remarks that backups are welcome or
Yeah,
try to
yeah, you
put
could put
that.
something in the remarks, absolutely, that home for sale contingency. It gets a little, it kind of depends too. I think you're accepting an offer, but then you're like also, I think some buyers might get upset. You're right. Like there's a little bit of a balance in the relationship that you've got with this. As far as how committed both of you all are to this process. And part of me, sometimes I don't want to disincentivize the buyer who's under contract with the kickout. But I got to do everything I can to make sure we get it under contract. So sometimes that's like, if it's a really good home for sale contingency contract, I may not push as hard. And if I felt like, you know what, this may be my only offer I might ever get on the property, I don't want to piss these buyers off. If I feel like, you know what, we took this, but I feel like we can get more, then I'm going to put something in MLS. If I don't really care as much, that if they do decide that, well, that's soured the relationship. So I think there's a little bit of a play in that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. I had one
Okay.
not too long ago that I think talking to if you have a buyer that has a home to sell, talking to the listing agent, I found that the seller was older woman. It was October, almost November. She didn't want to move over the winter. So she wanted 3 months, and that gave them plenty of time to sell their house.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. And it could be a timing thing, right? Yeah, it may just fit in perfectly. Okay, B. Buyer's property we listed exclusively and marketed and actively marketed by licensed real estate broker and entered into multiple listing service within 3 days of the date of ratification at a price not to exceed X. So let me go back. Shira had asked about changing the status, and Etta, you had asked about status too. So Bright requires you within 2 days to change the status. Um, you can slow roll it and wait the 2 days within your right in Bright to change the status to under contract. Um, so if that's something that you don't want to let the buyer go, but you're coming up on a weekend and maybe you got a showing that's coming up on Sunday, right? And you're looking at this off, you need to ratify this thing like today or it's going to go away. Maybe you do like, you know, you can use that to your favor. Just that's a loophole in the Bright rules. Thank you. Um, okay, entered into MLS. I've had some debate over this that some people have said, well, coming soon is considered actively marketed. I would just be really careful. I mean, it's like we talked about this a lot in this class as far as capital letters, right? Like I almost feel like this should be a capital A, right? Like in bright and active status. And I think if you're as the listing agent, you just may want to make sure this is really clear. I've had agents, kind of one of the last ones I got was they'd asked for 14 days to get the home on the market. And their pitch was that look, like that 14 days allows them to get the home perfect, um, which was in our best interest. But part of me was like, we'll just wait. We're going to wait to, ratify this thing until you're within 3 days of getting the home perfect. I just don't want to sit off the market while you decide what work you're going to do on the house. Um, and I tell my clients all the time as a listing agent, I don't care what price they're giving us. This is the most important price to start off with because if this price is jacked up, we're not getting whatever price they've offered us. It's just a waste of time. So this is where, as a listing agent, I want your comps. I want to see what your marketing plan is. If I don't know you, I want to see how you're going to market this property. And again, going back to Briar's property, this could be a property that's in New York, right? Like I need a lot more information to understand, you know, because we're basically partnering with you on this at this point. We're relying on your New York agent to do their job. So got to have a better sense of what that price is going to be. Um, all right. And then as far as they've given you the property address, if it's local, I would ask to go see it. Um, if they say absolutely not, it's a red flag. Um, one I went into and there was no way they were going to be ready for market in 3 days. Um, you know, so all right, C. So this is the paragraph they keep referring to as 1C. So this is how the buyer satisfies this contingency. 3 ways to do it. Number one, they satisfy the contingency by delivering a seller with a copy of a ratified contract with evidence that all contingencies other than financing have been removed or waived, together with a conditional commitment for financing from an institutional lender from the financing described in said contract. Conditional commitment, right? It goes back into the definition of what a conditional commitment is. Basically, that it's any outstanding conditions are okay after initial underwriting, but these are typically going to be re-verification of things they've already pulled. For instance, income is one that most lenders are going to do another verification of income or employment right before closing. So, and all the contingencies removed. HOA is something to consider too in this. I want to make sure that HOA has been, docs have been delivered. So again, as a listing agent, you got a lot more, like you literally have two deals now that you are managing in a sense, or at least you got to really care about what that because this listing agent may be wonderful or they may be trash, and you got to make sure that they're thinking about all the things that you would be thinking about. Second option, buyer may remove the contingency by delivering a lender's letter stating that the financing is not contingent in any manner on the sale, settlement of the release of other real estate. and has sufficient funds available for down payment and closing costs necessary. Like Stephen pitched on our call, he did this for my clients so that we could go. What's that? Yeah, like he's got a bridge package that's really attractive. And we just did it on my clients who sold a townhome in Alney and purchased a home. They were bringing their parents into their household, so they were able to negotiate a very good offer um, by doing a non-contingent offer first instead of doing this, because this was the first option we looked at, but it turns out the package Stephen had was it was complex on the financing side, but got them a much better deal, right? Because again, if you're going in with this type of package, me as the listing agent, I want to see you're going to price your property reasonably. So now I'm involved in how you price your property. B, I want a higher price, right? Like there should be a reward for the risk that we're taking. So if you can go non-contingent, right? You can list your property wherever you want to list your property, and B, um, now I can negotiate with the seller a little bit more. But if it comes down to it, and let's say you didn't want to like tap into stocks, bonds, right? Like pull stuff out of the market. Um, you could do that, but if it comes down to it and you get this, let's say this in paragraph A, the 3-day notice, now you can go to plan B, right? So it's always good to start talking. Okay, I know you don't want to go plan B, but we may be in this contract and all of a sudden we're looking at, so what does plan B look like? And just make sure that because the last thing you want to do is only have 3 days to formulate a plan B, right? You want to make sure that plan B is kind of sitting in the wings. And then option three is basically like evidence of sufficient funds available to complete settlement without obtaining financing, right? Buyer wins the lottery, um, you know, cashes out all their stock, something like that. Okay. If buyer, sure, look at all this. Here's the other thing. Just I skipped over this a little bit. Um, I'm big on, so whenever I get an offer, rarely does anyone ever submit proof of funds. I always ask for proof of funds. And in this case, I would ask for a net sheet if I'm the listing agent. Um, you know, because depending on how the financing is structured, they may be pulling their cash from the sale of the property. And sometimes what happens is the lender says, oh, well, they're just getting all the cash from the sale of the property. Most lenders don't run net sheets on real estate sale transactions all the time. That I'm not just going to take them for their word. I want to see it in writing. And that's why I always ask for proof of funds. Because again, sometimes it's like, will I accept an offer without proof of funds? Well, will my clients accept an offer without proof of funds? Sure. Right. I'm not going to let that stop them if that's what they want to do. But the answer I get back from agents when I ask for proof of funds tells me a lot, right? Sometimes I get it like lickety split, right? Like
Always ask for proof of funds.
always, all the time. Yep. And again, I don't require it, right? I'm not one of those that like, well, I'm not going to accept your offer or that kind of thing because I think it's really your client's decision. But I think it does show me like, you know, and there's times I've asked for proof of funds, and what I get back is they can't afford it. And or based on the escalation, they can't afford it at the escalation, right? Like, and sometimes agents just haven't thought through this stuff, and maybe the lender isn't necessarily, they're driving in their car when I called them, and they're just telling me whatever I want to hear sometimes too, that I do want to see it in writing. Okay, so let me go back. Paragraph D. So if the buyer satisfies paragraph 1C1, right? They remove their contingency, but it's still conditioned upon this buyer settling. This adds in the home to settle contingency. Sometimes what happens, I'll see people do paragraph 1 and then add on paragraph 2. You don't need to add paragraph 2 in. Paragraph 2 is basically paragraph D. And what happens here is the contract will remain contingent upon the settlement now of the buyer's property. settlement under this contract may not be delayed more than, and I always say, like, what's days here to put in here? 1 to 7, I think is reasonable. Anything more than that, I just don't want to tie my seller's property up if there's something tragically wrong and now I'm just stuck with a bad offer for another 7 days. Um, and I can always extend this, right? Like there's nothing precluding me as the listing agent from giving the buyer's agent more time, or the buyer more time, but I'd much rather keep this tight. Vice versa, as the buyer, I'd much rather negotiate this up, not just something ridiculous that they feel like, why are they so unconfident that they're going to be able to, that they're going to have a delay? So there's a little balance in that. But 1 to 7 is reasonable. I think probably 3 is the right number. Because that would also kind of get you through a weekend, right? Because if it had to be delayed, and then it gets you, potentially 2 days could be eaten up by Saturday, Sunday. All right. Questions on paragraph 1. This is really complicated, but good stuff. A couple tips for you. Ideally, you want everyone to use the same title company if you are trying to do some coinciding settlements. If you are using different title companies, you could basically you could have this whole thing go sideways over timing of wires, right? Like, so um, that could be an issue. And I do warn people. So I said, well, you'll never be homeless, and I kind of walked that one back for a second. There is a situation where um, the everything's fine on this side, right? Like well, I'm sorry, everything's fine on the buyer's sale of their property. They get their home under contract. They've gone through inspections, and now let's say they've removed the um, property kick out um, situation, but something happens, and let's say they've got, like, they run a painting company and they've got panel trucks, and this property's in Montgomery Village and they cannot park their trucks in Montgomery Village. There could be a situation where the buyer is stuck selling their home, and now the home that they this home um, that they've got the home for sale contingency on, they cannot purchase anymore. Something fell apart on it. Um, there could be a situation where they could be stuck selling and don't have a home to buy now. To prevent that, you can put a contingent on seller purchasing another home on their that buyer, their sale. They're wearing their seller hat in this case, and this would allow them, if something got squirrely on the new purchase, they could pull out. And I'll get to that. But just keep that in the back of your mind that this is not completely bulletproof, that your buyer, there is a scenario where your buyer could be left selling their house, that they don't have an out on selling their house, and they don't have a house to go to, even though you've gone through all of this steps. Make sense? Okay. Just give me an amen from here and there. It's all good. Okay, 2. Settlement of buyer's property contingency. So this is one, and sometimes this gets used incorrectly. This is one where the buyer has uh, put their home on the market, gotten under contract, gone through the inspections, um, everything but financing. They could have removed financing too, but they're ready to go. They're basically like, all we're doing is waiting for closing, and now they're shopping. They got a lot more power to negotiate with sellers because they're a lot more secure than paragraph 1, because they've gone through one of the hardest parts. They've cleared lots of hurdles to get to this point. So this is one where you're submitting a copy of ratified contract with all contingencies other than financing being removed or waived, with a conditional commitment for financing. Again, defines what that conditional commitment is based on GCAAR's definition. And then settlement, again, we use the same paragraph. Settlement may not be delayed more than, again, I recommend 1 to 7 days. Probably 3 is the right answer, without prior written consent. Um, so this is a really good strategy. Again, as a listing agent, I want to see net sheet. I want to see your contract. I recently got one of these, and once I got the contract, it wasn't. They had not cleared any contingencies, and it was contingent on a sale of another property. So it really wasn't this. Um, but it was somewhere in between one and two. Um, and with that said, we move forward with the idea that we understood what our risks were in this, but it really wasn't this. And the buyer's agent was not upfront with me that this is, wasn't until I asked that I saw this.
So sorry,
Yep.
so you'd have to give the whole contract, that would be all when you say with that it shows it's waived, it's all those follow-up ones that say we've released it now, or, I mean, you can't just send those pages, it has to be the whole kit and caboodle?
I want the whole thing. Yeah. If something's missing, yeah.
Okay, all right,
And I just want to confirm, like, hey, like, just want to confirm home inspections, definitely done. Um, yeah. So I'll kind of reconfirm some of that stuff. I do want to talk.
okay, so you're using it to make more conversation too.
Yeah. And I want to talk to the lender on the other deal too. So I'll
Mm-hmm,
ask permission, hey, do you mind if I reach out to that lender too?
mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right, three, backup contract. We talked about this like in both contracts. So this is where this contract is first backup to another contract dated, and this is where that date almost labels part of the contract. So so this is dated. So this is the when this is used is you're the buyer, you submitted an offer on a property, listing agent said, look, it was really close. You guys came in second place. The seller decided to go with another offer. I'll know in 7 days after the home inspection whether it sticks or not because this buyer had to move some money from overseas, whatever, right? Um, you can always ask if you can be in a backup position. So a backup position is you basically come to terms with your offer, but you're kind of lying in wait. In a sense, I think this is a good option. What this is this just created an option for your buyer. They don't have to take the option if they don't want. Your buyer can continue to keep shopping, but at least you know, and I always say this paragraph, um, as a listing agent, I don't ever say never, but I would almost never take a backup contract because it if let's say the prices change, prices go up, buyer's locked in at a lower price. If prices go down, the buyer, all they have to do is void this. My seller's stuck with this as the next best option. I would much rather, hey, like if something does fall apart, I'm coming back to you, right? Like, um, and if anything needs to, because again, if something was going to get renegotiated, it's going to get renegotiated anyways. If it's not in my seller's best interest, that I limit my seller from getting any benefits because we recently had one that fell apart and we had four offers. The primary fell apart. And we went back to the three that didn't get it and actually got my seller another 100,000 more. And I'm talking like this was in May of this year. So if I ratified that one as a backup, I would have left 100,000 on the table.
Couldn't you argue though that this could also work the other way, where if, like, let's say for example you had a house sitting, you finally got an offer, and then you get another offer and the market is changing, things are sitting longer, and you're like, oh god, like, let's put this as a backup offer, because theoretically you could also get less for your son. Or I guess they could come back and renegotiate it anyway.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because what this says is the contracts become primary. Oh well, and here to the other thing is that as a buyer's agent, you got to tell the seller who your buyer is. I don't love that part. Um, because it's well, actually, yeah, because as the listing agent, you're telling the buyer who the other buyer is. Potentially, they could reach out to that buyer and yeah, they could well, more so like, hey, we did a pre-inspection. Just want to let you know we found this, this, and this. They could do something to like to your offer. So I don't love that either, that I'm giving them more information than they need to know. Um, so this will be shall become primary contract immediately upon delivery of notice from seller that the other contract is void, along with a copy of the fully executed release. Buyer may void this backup contract at any time, but prior to becoming primary by delivering notice to seller. So the buyer has all these outs that they can, renege on this deal. I just don't see it in the seller's best interest to keep them on board when I'll come back to them, because if they find something else, they're voiding anyways. If they don't find something else, I can still go back to them. And if there's a situation where now I got another offer that came in too as another backup, now they got to compete, right? There's not many scenarios I see that this works in your seller's best interest. As a buyer's agent, many agents will accept a backup because part of it is they'd like to just have,
Oh, look, I have a backup offer for you.
yep, something in the wings. Um, so if you, as a buyer's agent, if you can get a backup in a backup position, do it, right? And it also gives you some insights into what the other offer, what happened with the other offer, what's going on, what pricing with the other offer. Okay, if the contract dated such and such settles, the backup will become void, rights and obligations go away. All time frames in your contract, your backup contract, don't start until you become primary. And additionally, the settlement date will be such and such days after the contract becomes primary, right? So that's usually going to be 30, 45 days, whatever, 20, 30, 25, 30. Um, so, your and deposits don't have to be delivered either. So again, there's no risk really to the buyer to being in a backup position. Well, let me take that. There's a 0.1% that while you're sending over your release of the contract, you get ratified and you have no contingencies whatsoever. There could be that scenario, um, but that's just something that you'd have to, you just have to you have to be very aware of. But if you've got contingencies and that you could get out on other things, then it's not as much of a concern. Make sense?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Four, contingent on seller purchasing another home. This contract is contingent until such and such for the seller to purchase another home. And I like purchase. This isn't like a capital P, so this is not a defined term. So is purchasing like getting under contract? Is purchasing getting under contract and clearing contingencies? Is purchase getting under contract, clearing contingencies, settling on the property? So you do have, depending on your negotiating ability for your seller, you have the ability to kind of push this out. This is the clause that you could use to ensure that you are never homeless, right? So you do on the contract you're accepting on your primary residence, you add in a contingent on seller purchasing another home. Now you go out shopping. And one thing you can do is you can tell the buyer you will reimburse them for any appraisal or inspections if the contract falls through. Because what you want so if I'm accepting as a buyer, I don't want to spend all this money if you're just out shopping and I don't know if you're going to buy anything or not. Um, as a seller, I want to incentivize you to get all your inspections done so I can go shop with option two, right? I want to have all of your contingencies removed. So one of the things that I've done in this is I've offered to the buyer's agent when I'm trying to negotiate a home home of choice. This is sometimes what 4 is called, home of choice contingency. I'll say we'll pay for all your appraisal and inspections up to $1,500 if this does not go through. So what's the risk for the buyer? Time. They lose time, basically. But that's a scenario for your very risk adverse clients, that this helps them. It could hurt them in the negotiation, right? The buyer may not want to go to the tippy top of the range if they know that they may not get the house. So it's all risk reward, right? It's a balance here. But this clause doesn't get used very often because I don't think agents understand how to use it. One of the things that's made it more successful is the reimbursement of the buyer's expenses so that they go forward with because if the buyer doesn't go forward with their contingencies, you're still stuck kind of in paragraph 1. You never move to paragraph 2 to shop because the buyer still has all their contingencies. Make sense?
You just write all that at the bottom there.
I just write it right in here.
Seller will reimburse.
Yep.
Up to $1,500 for any
Yep.
out-of-pocket costs.
Yep. Because if you try to push this 4, most savvy agents are going to say, well, we're not going to start our inspections until this period's over, right? So you're just kind of a dog chasing its tail. All right, so these, well, except for 3, 1, 2, and 4 are really important paragraphs in this type of market, to be very aware of and figure out, can you use this? And again, I find that clients tend to make better decisions when they feel like they have choices, right? And some of those, and also then you throw in like a bridge option on the financing side, which could potentially tackle and make some of this irrelevant. But a bridge option, is a complex financial situation. Sometimes it requires a HELOC. So there's just some things in that too. But having these 3 paragraphs plus a bridge option in your back pocket is really cool.
If you're a buyer going into contract with a seller who's asked, so like, let's say you're a buyer, you need to get your house under contract to get the house that you want. Isn't it a good idea for you then to also put number 4 into your contract coming in case something falls through? Like, let's say you're a seller. Okay, I'm sorry. If you go under contract with a seller who
You're the listing agent or buyer's agent.
you are the buyer's agent, and the home that you are going under contract for is contingent on seller purchasing another home.
Okay. Yeah.
But you also have like 1 and 1 done. You should also then do number 4 as well, right? Because then that protects your buyers if that person doesn't find a home.
And they have a home. Yeah.
You are worried about being homeless. So
Yep.
like.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
This 4 can throw a wrench in kind of a multiple. Yeah.
The domino effect.
Yeah. If the purchaser purchasing your home is not contingent on purchasing something, 4 can work.
Okay.
I'm sorry, it's not contingent on selling something. 4 can work.
Okay.
But if the buyer buying your home is contingent on something, 4 is probably not going to work.
Okay.
And again, this is scenarios that come up. Like I do this a lot with agents. Bring out the yellow pad and we work through this. Just understanding, because sometimes we just got to figure out what the options are. So if you have any questions about this stuff, like when you're in the moment, like call me, text me, email me. Okay, 5, lead-based paint. So this allows the buyer to have a lead-based paint inspection. We rarely ever see these, but this is the paragraph that allows it. Lead-based paint is not part of your home inspection contingency, so you need a separate inspection for this. This is very similar to the way radon's structured. You either do A or B. A, you deliver a report, an unsatisfactory report, along with an addendum asking for remediation. You have a back and forth, 3-day, or the buyer can just void it.
MR is different, correct? MR's got that in their contract.
The lead,
Lead-based isn't,
I think it's a separate.
Okay.
Yeah. Let me take a look real quick since you mentioned that. Oh, good. No, it's good. Let me just look real quick at the. Yep, lead's one of the in your
okay, so it is.
in your
in there.
menu. Yep.
Okay, that's what I meant. It's like
Oh.
included in that section.
Oh, yeah, I thought you meant in the MR contract. Yep, it's in
Oh,
the
sorry.
property inspection. Yep, you got it. All good. All right, lead-based paint. 6, third-party approval. It's really rare. This is for potentially like a trustee sale, or a court-ordered sale. Again, it could be one where the seller can sign off, but needs someone else to approve that. This is not for short sales. Some people used to use this for short sales, and it doesn't work with short sales. But that is, and so basically at the end of that deadline, the if the third party approval doesn't, if there's no communication and there's not a disapproval, then it's considered approved and the contract moves forward. This is not one that dies if approval doesn't happen. Just so you know, just in case short sales do come back, the way short sales are written is that it dies if by the deadline they don't get approval. And that's why it says do not use this for short sales. So this third party approval, the contingency will die at the end of that, and the contract goes forward. 7, this is a paragraph that I'm surprised they haven't taken out. This is really not, I don't think that this is quite as relevant because now we're negotiating brokerage fees anyways. So this basically just says that in the transaction that the buyer broker is being paid solely by the buyer. Again, if there isn't an addendum for commissions, then that's the case anyways. 8, master plan review. This gives the buyer a period where they can review the master plan in Montgomery County. All right, 9. Okay, 9 is a lot. So 9 is the post-settlement air conditioning and swimming pool inspection. I will tell you, do not use this unless it's absolutely last resort. There are 100 better ways to slice and dice what you're trying to accomplish. And I sat on GCAAR contracting clauses committee, and this paragraph, we just, once it got written, it was good enough, and we never tweaked it just because it's just like it never gets used, and most people are doing different agreements, but we didn't want to get rid of it because it is one that it's important to understand that maybe you should create some type of contingency or some type of plan if you are in the dead of winter and you've got a pool and a air conditioning system. The way this, and the reason why I tell you that is because May 30, so there's this, so let's say you settle on your property in December, you wrote the offer in November, couldn't check the AC and this, let's say the AC is the easiest one, but it applies for swimming pools too. So you have this clause that basically by May 31, you would have the property inspected or have the AC inspected and it's sent to the seller. Or seller has the opportunity to be present at that inspection of the AC unit. If you don't get the inspection done prior to May 31st, this contingency goes away. Or if you use the equipment prior to May 31 without the official inspection done, then your contingency goes away. So there's these pitfalls that could happen. We actually had one where someone did a swimming, they used this for swimming pools, and like the seller found out that like, well, one of the kids got in the pool, like, and like was trying to say that the inspection, I mean, it's just there's these little nuances to this that make this really complex. Um,
How did you know somebody used the air conditioning?
how would you, yeah, I don't know. Maybe so, for instance, like, so I imagine like some, I don't know, well, yeah. Well, if the seller brought in a third part, so there is an opportunity that said so if it's found that, so I'll walk through this. Yeah. So buyer does their, so buyer shall give notice to seller, date and time on when they're going to do their inspection, and seller have the option of being present. Inspection shall be completed by uh, an appropriately jurisdiction licensed contractor. Buyer agrees not to attempt to operate the system. If they do, they lose their warranty under this paragraph. In the event the inspections show the system are not in the required conditions, then seller's obligations hereunder with respect to the system shall be deemed fulfilled. In the event the inspections show the system are not in the required condition, buyer shall provide notice to the seller no later than the inspection date. So they have to get the notice to the seller by the 31st as well. In which event this seller will be responsible for the actual cost to replace the system in the required condition. All remedial action taken hereunder shall be performed good and working like manner. And selected by the seller who, and the contractor needs to be licensed in the jurisdiction the property is located and shall be completed within 10 days after buyer's notice to seller. So in that case, Shira, let's say inspection happens, AC system's not working, buyer submits to seller that AC system's not working. Seller hires their HVAC company. HVAC company comes in, runs a report, let's say, and says that no, this thing has been running, you know, I don't know, like, I mean, it could have a log and, and some systems like Nest and whatnot. Yeah, they could go in and say, no, like the AC was turned on for the whole month of May prior to our May 20th. Potential, right? Like, I don't know. So the seller will have the right to get the property hire the contractor for the repairs. They have 10 days to get it done. If they don't get it done in the 10-day repair window, buyer can make the repairs, and the buyer then has 10 days to get the repairs done. If the buyer doesn't get the repairs done in the 10-day period, this contingency dies. And let's say the seller didn't do the repairs, buyer does the repairs. Now the buyer says, well, here, seller, here's the invoice. And the seller says, I'm in Florida, go piss off, right? Like, come find me. Now the buyer's done, we've done all of this stuff and there's no money on the table. Again, there's a better way to negotiate this. And I think sometimes that's, put money in escrow, give money to, put money in escrow that's earmarked for an HVAC company or a pool company, set up that an inspection will be done on a certain date, like there's a better way to negotiate this. There's just way too many, like gotcha moments and way too many little technicalities. Again, that 10-day period, like there's just a lot could happen. It could be like scorching hot during that 10-day period and no HVAC techs are available, right? Like now you just blew this whole thing up and you set the expectation as the buyer that this will be taken care of.
Yeah.
And you really haven't done that. So I just recommend, sorry I went through that whole thing, but there's a framework here, but I would not use this as the framework. Paragraph 10, 1031 exchanges, buyer and seller agree to fill out paperwork. Basically, it's just it's so that one party can't hold the other party hostage if they are doing a 1031 exchange. 1031 exchanges are tax deferred kind of they're not necessarily commercial, but they can be property exchanges where you may have a rental property and you're going to sell it and then buy another rental property at the beach. And this just the buyer's going to have to, and if the seller's selling their 1031, the new buyer is going to have to sign paperwork. And this just says the buyer agrees that they will sign the appropriate paperwork. Doesn't affect them in any way, but it just prevents a buyer from saying, I'm not signing your paperwork unless you give me $10,000, which has happened. 11, and I have a good 1031 person if you need them. You know, 11 appraisal contingency. So this is typically going to be for cash deals, could be for like a hard money lender as well, not to be used with conventional FHA or VA. So you don't need to add this onto your conventional FHA or VA addendums. But if you do want to have a separate appraisal, this is the separate appraisal. And basically, buyer will have the appraisal done, and then if it's low, the buyer can ask the seller. Once the buyer asks the seller, there's a 3-day negotiation period. During that 3-day negotiation period, you can go back as many times as you want, but it's over at 6 p.m. on the third day after after the buyer gives notice. If you can't, at the end of the negotiation period, parties are unable to reach an agreement, buyer shall have the option to void the contract by the deadline. Otherwise, the appraisal contingency is removed and the contract remains in full force and effect.
It's more seller friendly, a little bit.
It,
If the buyer
the
doesn't,
buyer can still back out.
but like it has to be before
They got 3 days. Yep, you got to get it done in 3 days.
6 p.m.
6 p.m. Yeah. All right, and then additional provisions. This is sometimes where we just add on that extra stuff. You know, if you're only using addendum clause B, sometimes like, you know, offer is only valid till 6 p.m. on Saturday, June 28th. You know. Okay, so that's the addendum of clauses B. Let's see here. I will real quickly, I will talk about because we did the other day. MR has a buyer sale financing settlement or lease of other real property. We talked about this on Tuesday. There's just not as much information in this, so there are some holes in this. First big thing is um, um, obviously you're going to notify the paragraph, you know, the property address right here. What's the property address? Um, the contract is contingent upon entering into a contract. It can be contingent on I'm sorry, buyer waiving their or receiving a loan commitment, and it be contingent on settlement. In most cases, you're going to need C, right? Because you need it typically contingent on settlement. You could put these other markers in here, but C is the most important one. C is really what you need to get to closing. As a listing agent, you may want A, may want a number in there that like you got to get this thing under contract within 10 days, 15 days. But they can get it under contract, but it's still, they haven't gotten through their inspections, anything like that. So this doesn't address inspections. The other thing it doesn't do is it doesn't give the seller a kick out. So GCAAR, there's a built-in kick out for the seller. The seller can kick out. Remember that 3-day period that we talked about? The seller receives a bona fide backup, they can kick the buyer out. This does not have a kick out. You need to add in the MR kick out clause. And this also, there's a back and forth period, a little bit of like the buyer's supposed to submit information, and then from receipt of that information, the seller will have a certain number of days to notify the buyer whether they feel that the evidence they provided is satisfactory or not. So just, you know, I don't love this because it just very much puts that puts it in the hands of the seller to decide whether they think it's satisfactory or not. And I think there's times when you could evidence the seller, and if they just want to be difficult, they decide that they're not going to accept that as evidence, and they have the right to accept that it's not. And I think in GCAAR, you could argue that we've given you notice of this is exactly what it says in the contract. This is what we believe it is. And if the seller doesn't accept it, then they don't necessarily have the right not to accept it if we believe it's accurate. Um, I think it just takes away some of the buyer's argument in that. It's a legal technicality, and hopefully you'll never be there. But this is the GCAR one. I'm sorry, the MR one. And then Becky, I didn't forget. You'd asked about so did you want to talk about tenant agency, or buyer broker agency?
Buyer broker.
Okay, because there is a tenant agency form. So and a lot of this is there's been changes made since the settlement, the commission settlement. But there's been like the rental stuff has not caught up to speed with it. So rentals were excluded from the commission lawsuit, but everything changed, but they haven't still addressed how buyer tenant brokerage works. So you just want to make sure that you don't just assume that the listing agent's gonna on a rental is gonna pay you.
Okay.
I have a couple sitting around right now that they're like, I've got a text from the listing agent. I'm like, I don't think that's. I mean, I'll go with it, but it's going to be a hard argument. Um, on the
So, I mean, when you contact them, the listing agent, though, are you just asking like upfront, are you going to pay tenant agent compensation? Like
I
okay.
will, but then I'll also follow up. I'll use like the addendum,
Okay.
or what is it, seller paid compensation. And even though it says seller, you can always modify that to landlord, and then
Okay.
whatever amount, you negotiate that, but make sure that that's in writing. The other
Okay.
thing is, um, as the tenant agent, the with my leases, there's two things. You're going to submit a security deposit and first month's rent.
Okay.
First month's rent is how we get paid. You want that to go to the listing broker.
Okay.
And the security deposit always goes to the seller or the landlord. Because if both go to the landlord, now the the listing company's got to go to the landlord to get the commissions paid back.
Okay.
And the landlord could be like, well, I'll get to it next week, right? And that's what we're dealing with right now. We have a landlord who's just kind of ghosting the listing agent. And
Okay.
I could tell the tenant, like, well, pay Keller Williams the second month rent, and we'll just consider that the commission. But the tenant's like, hold on, this is your all's beef with the seller, not mine or the landlord. I don't want to screw up my lease, 2 months in.
Okay.
So that's just kind of a word of warning.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, so buyer broker agreement, and actually, I'm working on creating a simplified buyer broker agreement by just literally throwing out some of these paragraphs. So that for those of you who are doing like one-time showings, you got a buyer who, like, again, this is 3 pages, right? First time you're meeting someone, you're jamming a 3-page document in front of them and saying, hey, don't worry, we're good, right? I'm not coming after you. Um, there's a lot of stuff in here that doesn't say that you're not coming after me, and I may not sign this. So I'll kind of dig into this. Okay, buyer brokerage. So purpose of this agreement, it's basically it sets up two things. Brokerage relationship. State of Maryland requires us to, understanding whom agents represent. You can only be represent the client, or they're a customer. You can't be a transactional agent where you sit in the middle and like, sure, I'll write the contract for the seller and the buyer, but I don't represent anyone. State of Maryland says You must represent one side or the other. You can't sit in the middle. So the brokerage relationship that sets up that you are going to be their buyer broker. And then the second thing is the contractual obligation. I can represent you all day long, but I can also represent you and not get paid, right? And I'm okay with that. Or I can represent you, but I also want to be paid. And that's what this creates also a contractual obligation. The reason why I mention this is because you also have to be very specific whether when you release a client or a client wants to be released, both things have to be released for the buyer to be free and clear to go. And when I bring that up is sometimes you might get someone who's, well, I've worked with this agent for 6 months. They were garbage. I've fired them and now I want to work with you. Well, do you have a release from them? Uh, well, yeah, I've got a release. Well, some agents will only release the brokerage relationship. They still they won't release the contractual obligation. So the buyer's free. That agent's no longer committed to them as their agent, but the buyer's still obligated to pay them if they buy something. So you just want to make sure you understand that there are two types of releases out there, and you just because your buyer says or a seller says they've got a release, they may only have a brokerage relationship release, not a brokerage relationship and contractual obligation release.
Is that like a separate form?
Yeah, there's a
Okay.
full, yeah, there's like a
Okay.
full release. Yeah, there's two
Okay.
release forms. Yeah. Yep. Okay, so buyer broker responsibility basically, kind of sets up what we're doing for them. It's a little limited, right? Um, use professional knowledge, assist buyer through process of acquisition, and represent their interests. Buyer's responsibility, they work exclusively with the buyer broker during the term of this and will contact the buyer if they want to look at any properties. They'll notify at open houses that the buyer broker is representing them for new homes, same thing. Um, Buyer agrees to make any first visits to any new home builder model only when accompanied by a licensee, right? This is something important to talk to your buyers about because builders are very specific on who brought them through the door the first time. Doesn't matter if you're doing all of the heavy lifting to get them so that they can sell their home and buy this. Um, if you haven't walked them through the front door, you're not getting paid. So that's a good one to have a conversation with the buyer because sometimes they're like, I don't want to bother you. It was Sunday. I saw on Instagram that you were somewhere, right? Like, so. Okay, for compensation, buyer acknowledges that compensation is negotiable and not prescribed by law, right? This is lawsuit material, why they're putting that in there. So compensation, buyer agrees to buyer broker shall receive a compensation of X percentage of the sales price or a flat fee at settlement of any property contracted to be purchased during the term of this agreement, no matter who locates the property, even if it was done entirely by the buyer. Buyer and buyer broker agree compensation shall be paid as follows. You got two options. One, the buyer will pay you, don't negotiate it in the contract, I will just pay you flat out. Or buyer shall seek payment of broker compensation from seller. Buyer authorizes buyer broker to request such contribution and offers to purchase property. Option two is what 99% of the time happens. The buyer says, well, sure, let's try to negotiate it from the seller first before I have to pay you the whole amount. So option two is what you'll typically be doing. Buyer understands that such seller contribution is negotiated and must be part of the contract. All right, B, additional broker compensation. This is the flat fee, what we call our base broker commission. So this is the 445. And that's due at settlement regardless of any seller payment of compensation. If the buyer has paid you a retainer, this is where a buyer has paid an advance fee of, and that's where you can put a retainer in. Some agents who work with investors do a retainer. I'm giving you $10,000 worth of knowledge to help you purchase this. If you decide you're just going to go skirt around me and go purchase something without me, go for it. But I got I got your 10K. That 10K will be credited back to you at closing if you do purchase something. So that's something to think about if you run into those situations. Rarely are buyers paying retainers in this marketplace. Um, just an option. Protection period, broker compensation purchased within X number of days. So this prevents a buyer from, so let's say you're on day 29 of your 30-day buyer broker agreement. You show the buyer a property, and the buyer's like, oh, this deal's done. I mean, my agreement to pay the buyer broker any money ends in 1 day. I'm just going to wait for 2 days, go straight to the seller. The protection period does protect you. The problem is in today's day and age, um, that amount has to be negotiated from the seller. Yes, the buyer will be obligated to pay it. You're not going out and suing a buyer. I'm just telling you right up. It's you can threaten it all day long, but you're not suing the buyer. That don't rely too much on this protection period. And I find that if I'm not gonna sue the buyer, then sometimes I'm not gonna make this a long protection period that might, some buyers may say, I don't want, I'm not gonna work with you because you got some huge protection period in here. So that's just something to think about. Most agents will do like
Sorry.
7 days, because usually 7 days is about you know, the time period that the buyer would probably have to make a decision. Um, I put 1 day in mine, but yeah, some people put 30 because the buyers don't read these agreements. I just don't love putting something in there that I don't want to get caught, like where a buyer gets upset about something once they read and understand what it really means. Amount of compensation offered, the total compensation received from any source may not exceed the amount or rate agreed to above. So if this says 2.5% and the seller's offering 3% plus a bonus of $10,000, the only thing you can accept is 2.5%. You can go to your buyer and say, hey, they're offering this. Do you want me? Can I accept it? Yeah, they can modify it. But if you're representing their interest, probably the second thing you should also say is you can do that, but you can also, we can try to negotiate it that you get the amount as well. What do you want to do? So this, you know, and we had a lot of discussions. Can you put like a minimum or a maximum? I always tell you, I in this space, put the maximum. If you want to tell the buyer, look, if the seller is only offering, let's say you put in 3% here, the seller's only offering 2.5%. Look, I'm not coming after you for the 0.5 difference, right? Like that works. And sometimes I've even sent buyers an email like to that effect that look, this is the intent. Um,
That then becomes negotiable though between the seller and the buyer, meaning like if they're offering free, you can't say, hey, I'm only gonna take 2.5. You can have that extra 0.5. That has to then go back to the
yeah, so
sales agent or the seller.
yeah, I would go back to this in GCAAR world, it goes back to the seller. In MR, technically it's written different because the broker's the one who's distributing the commissions. In theory, what you could do, you could take the 3% and then give the buyer a rebate also, which is totally legal. But you got to make sure that it's within the limits of what they can accept
For the loan.
for the loan. Yep. Or you do let's say they're offering 3%, you can do a 2.5% co-op commission, and the buyer is asking for a 0.5% in credit too. You can negotiate it kind of two ways. Payment of compensation, broker's compensation is due at settlement. And this gets into like, unless the buyer after sales contract kind of defaults, you can go after the buyer for the amount of commission that you would have been owed. Again, like when I'm looking at my very like toned down buyer broker agreement, this is a paragraph I'm throwing out. again, we're not suing buyers. We're not going after buyers if they default on something. Um, we can always threaten, but it doesn't end well. So sometimes why create a problem that's not gonna exist?
If you, I'm just,
Yep.
again, if you do sue a buyer, does that have to go, like, does that have to come from the brokerage in a lawsuit, or can you sue them privately?
Yeah, so technically, we both would have to,
Okay.
because, yeah, we both are on the agreement, we both have to, and I guess you probably could try to, if your broker said, no, I'm not following you on this lawsuit, sure, you could go after the buyer as an individual. Um, it's not gonna end well. Unless there's something super egregious, right, that like, um, and you'd have to prove damages, right? Most courts are very buyer friendly. You're the one with the license. You're the professional. It's hard for the public to injure a professional, right? The other way around, all day long, courts are very sympathetic to that. So you just got to be, again, and again, I always say like a buyer can do a lot more, or a client can do a lot more harm to you than you can do to them, right? All right, 5 term. So it commences when signed and expires on such and such date. Um, you know, people put in 6 month, 3 month. You want to have it long enough that it just covers you. Um, I do for termination, we'll get to that point, but when it comes to termination, I always tell buyers and sellers, all you have to do is just send me 1 day written notice, right? And I'll terminate. I'd much rather get a 6 month and then if they're not happy, because usually if they're not happy, I'm not happy either. Let's get rid of this. But what I don't want is like I'm working really hard and all of a sudden this thing expires, or I've got to go back to the buyer every month and like re-up it.
This is where though, right, like we've had buyers that they contacted us, they just wanna see a property. This is where you can be like, look, I'm just gonna put a day, you see this house, you like it, you buy it with me, great. Don't worry, you're not locked into 6 months.
Yep. Yeah. Yep. You can make this 1 day buyer broker agreement. And that's what I'm trying to work on right now is a 1 day, like a 1 pager
Yeah,
that's real simple, like for 1 day situations. Um, and again, this agreement extends if you're under contract, it extends through settlement. 6 termination. So this agreement may be terminated prior to expiration only by mutual written consent by both parties in DC. Maryland, we have this 2-step. So unilaterally, client can fire me as their buyer agent in the brokerage relationship by just sending me notice, 1-way notice. But they must have a mutual release of the contractual obligation under the terms of this contract. So that's the part. Again, in Maryland, we have we have 2 types of relationships. 7 is kind of a disclaimer. Basically, buyers should seek advice for tax appraisal, home inspection, surveying. This is kind of the CYA. 8, general provisions, again, more CYA. We must adhere to the code of ethics. Delivery, this does talk about delivery so that the buyers start understanding. Let's see here. Okay, notices. Agreement shall be deemed enforceable when it and all addenda and all modifications have been signed, initialed where required by buyer broker, or supervising manager, and delivered to the other party. This is important because, which I don't love, is that you need my signature or Betty's signature on this to be valid. So I encourage you guys, like, I'm on my phone too much. So if you just send me your buyer broker in DocuSign, DigiSign, Authentisign, whatever it is, get me to sign off on this, because if not, you got no rights in this, especially on your listing agreements too. So just keep that in mind. MR allows you all to sign and ratify, I believe, directly. You don't need me. All right, and then inclusions, right? Like, is this like, if you're typically going to be showing some Remax Realty Center property, so please get a consent for dual agency signed with your buyer broker agreement too. Some of you all who work on teams, the notice for dual agency within a team should be signed too ahead of time. It's not necessary, but good practice. And then additional provisions. This is where sometimes I'll add in buyer may cancel agreement with 1 day written notice, just to let them know that I'm not here to lock them in. Again, it's if a buyer wants to really screw you over, they can do it. This is a paper handshake. To enforce your rights under this agreement, the buyer has to do something really egregious. You have to prove actual damages. And it's just a really hard thing to do. So I just want to set up the relationship that the buyer doesn't, because sometimes buyers make dumb decisions when they feel like they're boxed in. They don't tell you they're concerned about something because sometimes, because their cousin told them, like, oh, there's shady real estate agents. You don't want to do this. You don't want to do that. So, I always want to just make sure the buyer understands that I'm not here to keep you in any relationship. Like, I need to prove to you that I'm valuable. Once I do that, like, then it's almost like everything else gets real easy. And I think the beginning of the relationship, and that's the one thing with these agreements and whatnot has gotten sticky, is we're like forced to jam these buyer broker agreements in front of people who we don't have any relationship with. And it's the law, right? Like, and my agency, what I really start doing for buyers doesn't start at swinging a door open. It starts when I'm actually at the property and I'm showing them, like, hey, here's things we're going to be looking out for. When I start going through comps, when I start going through negotiations, that's when my job really starts. And even some jurisdictions like Colorado have pushed back on the buyer broker agreements and have said, look, like, you're not an agent once by swinging a door. You're an agent when you start giving advice and doing those things. So it is what it is, but I always like to give my buyers an easy out. Okay, sorry. Any questions on that? All right. Thank you, guys. That's kind of concludes today. Um, did you all like? I'm out of town next week. And I think we have a couple other Wednesday wisdom stuff coming up. I was looking at picking up either August, September. Are there other things you guys want to cover with the contracts?
If like we think of something, can we shoot you an email?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, and anything on the listing side you want to talk about too, we could get into the listing side as well. But yeah, and as things come up, and just keep in mind, like GCAAR does 3 different contract changes throughout the year. So keep that in mind. There's usually one in there's one. So let me walk that back. MR does one contract change a year in October. GCAAR does one right after MR does theirs because it typically tweaks GCAAR stuff for Maryland. So there's one in Maryland only per year. There's one in the fall for GCAAR, and then there's one in the spring for GCAAR, and then there's one in the summer for GCAAR. So there's 3 throughout the year for GCAAR. And we'll try to keep you guys up to date whenever any of those happen. All right, cool. Thank you, guys.
Thanks,
Have a great
Joe.
time in Italy.
Thank you, Joe.
All right. Thanks, Margie.